it worked out. So, well, I'm anxious to hear about the fighter planes tonight. So that should be good.
I think you could fly one, Julia, personally.
Not with my eyesight.
Julia, if you can decode Enigma, I think you can figure out an airplane.
Yeah.
Oh, I doubt it. That's not one of my aims in life, to fly a plane. I watched the two collide today. I thought that was just awful.
Oh no. Yeah.
Yeah, the one in Dallas, that was terrible.
Yeah.
Horrible tragedy on that.
Did they blame it on the plane or the pilots or the weather?
The video I saw, it looked like the small fighter jet flew into the flying fortress. So I don't know what was going on with whatever, but I would assume that was pilot error.
Good grief.
Yeah, I'm going to start the music and let everybody in.
Okay.
Good evening, everyone. Welcome to Veterans Breakfast Club Happy Hour for Monday, November 14th. My name is Sean Hall. I'm the Director of Programming with the VBC. It's good to see you all here in the Zoom room once again from last Friday's Vetathon. By a show of hands, I'm going to keep this in gallery mode for a second, and welcome to everybody from social media as well. And by show of hands, who was able to chime in for Vetathon for a little bit? We were on from 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. on Friday for Veterans Day. So happy belated Veterans Day for those of you who we didn't see. Brad Washabaugh, you hosted a partial or an hour there late into the night. We had a great turnout. I'll go over a little bit of a review of that, but we're really excited to get to the subject matter tonight. Evan Werner is our guest tonight from the Top Gun School. We're going to be talking all things fighter jets. And for anybody who knows anything about me over the last 2 years with BBC, is that I kind of geek out over fighter jets. So super stoked to talk about this. Evan last joined us whenever we did our Top Gun Maverick special screening here in Bridgeville. So we get to do this again on Zoom, which is nice. So we'll have some stuff to go over from that. We'll talk about the movie later because I certainly have nothing bad to say about it, but I'll be interested to hear Evan's take. If at any point you would like to ask anything, please put your hand up. Right now I have everybody on mute when you enter, and I have to ask you to unmute. Just helps to keep the sort of noise down at the beginning as we let people in and get started here. Let's see here. But first, before we get started with everything, I am going to go ahead and share my screen and thank our wonderful sponsors who we are always very happy with. D&D Auto Salvage. They've been with us for quite some time and have recently re-upped to continue supporting our programming. D&D Metal Recycling and Auto Salvage began as a small hauling and used auto parts operation in the Pittsburgh area in the late 1970s, and they've grown into a full-service metal recycling company with 2 locations in Lawrenceville and Tarentum. They accept all types of metal, both ferrous and non-ferrous, that may be generated from or by industrial manufacturing, construction and demolition, and small commercial entities, as well as individual customers. If you need a quote, you can contact them by going to dndautosalvage.com. And I would also like to thank tobacco-free Adagio Health. They have also been with us for quite some time, and we're happy that they also re-upped with us. Let me get some more people in the room. We got a lot of, if you've never hosted a Zoom, and whenever somebody joins your room, you hear ding, ding. So through the first 5 minutes of every program, I hear ding, 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 letting me know that people are in the waiting room, which is great because I think we have a good room tonight for this great discussion. But tobacco-free Adagio Health, they are dedicated to reducing and preventing tobacco use and to getting the word out about the hazards of smoking and secondhand smoke. They're all about health, and they want people to quit. So they have a popular quit line, 1-800-QUIT-NOW. They have classes, they have nicotine replacement therapy, and they educate people, children especially, about tobacco use from cigarettes, cigars, pipes, chew, snuff, and vaping. And finally, they advocate for public and private policies that ensure healthy places to live, work, and play. You can learn all about tobacco-free Adagio Health at their website. It's tobacco-free.adagiohealth.org. I will have them on a future episode of the Scuttlebutt. I'm very excited to talk with them about, it's been about a year since I had them on. So they're going to come back on and talk about all the updates they have going on at Tobacco Free. And yes, the Vetathon, which we've finished up on Friday. It was a great program. I enjoyed it start to finish. I opened the program at 11. I was with it for most of the day throughout, took a couple breaks while Todd hosted and different hosts came in. And I'm going to ask Brad to unmute. Brad, since you hosted an hour, but you were jumping in and out throughout the day. Scott Masters, you brought in a Canadian World War II D-Day veteran to chat with us early on in the day. But I thought I'd ask you, Brad, what your thoughts were on the program throughout.
Well, it was like going into like a five-star restaurant and looking at the menu and picking out what you would like, and all of it was good. I mean, we had such a wide variety, and I couldn't stay for all of it, but I did see some of the shows. And for my hour, I was really proud to have my longtime friend Tom Hastings on, who talked about in 1988 during Operation Praying Mantis, how he was the leader of an assault unit that took down an Iranian oil platform. And although we've been friends for 40 years or more than that, he did not tell me all the detail. Very humble warrior that was put in a very important and stressful position, and he came through for the United States and the Marine Corps, and successfully taken this Iranian oil platform that was threatening shipping during that time. So, but all of it was great, and it was let's do it again.
Yeah, I mean, certainly next year we're going to have another 12-hour lineup, 11 a.m. to 11 p.m. I think we hit our sweet spot with that. The year prior we did 24 hours. We did midnight to midnight, and I think by the end of that we were all a little loopy. So we were certainly feeling a lot better at the end of this one at the 11 p.m. hour. But couldn't agree more. Just museums. We had the Researching Veterans in the Family with Bill Beagle. He was incredible. We're going to have him come back and do a happy hour with us. And the hour that I hosted, Coast to Coast with Colonel Kenny Mintz, he was wonderful. He walked across the country over the last year. He's walked the full 3,000 miles from Washington, D.C. over to California. Talked a bit about what his thoughts were after serving the country for over 30 years, and then getting to see it and meet people up in person. I thought that was a really wonderful story. Seth, the speaker at 2 p.m., had a lot of energy. He's a motivational speaker, U.S. Air Force vet. Loved the 7 p.m. hour with military women with Phyllis Wilson and Marilla Cushman. Both of them were wonderful, talking about the Military Women's Foundation and Memorial, the Military Women's Memorial down in DC. We're going to be doing future collaborations with them, so look forward to more of that next year. Marine Corps hour was it was all right. It was fantastic. And the President's Hour to close it out was just pure fun. It was just fun to kick back and relax and and celebrate the day. So thank you all for whoever did and was able to enjoy it. And it is up on YouTube. So if there's like an hour in there where you're like, hey, I would have loved to have heard Ryan All's Army Hour, go right to YouTube, fast forward to that spot, and you could check it out in repeat on reruns. Scuttlebutt had a new episode. I host the podcast through the VBC. We had a new episode come out today. It's in the bottom right. You can see there. That is At Ease Veterans Magazine. I interviewed Christine Walker, the editor-in-chief of At Ease. As you know, VBC puts out our own magazine that's free. We bring it out quarterly. It's just called VBC Magazine. They do a quarterly as well, but they do a subscription service. So they are written by veterans for veterans. That's sort of their claim, their niche. It's a wonderful conversation with her about how she got started and how she built At Ease and what they're all about and what you can expect if you pick up a magazine. Check out their website and subscribe if you like. No shortage of veteran stories, so happy to support them and highlight them on an episode of the Scuttlebutt. But as you can see, these are several episodes from this current season of season 7. One that I'm very excited about was the very first one, The American Soldier. That was Douglas Terrell. He wrote a one-man play using letters from active duty servicemen and women from Revolutionary War all the way up till today. And he took all of those letters, created a 90-minute one-man play and he tours it around the country. So it was a great conversation with him. Team Foster had a wonderful conversation with Nick Learman on there. And the Knife Hand Company was very interesting because this is a gentleman, Timothy Kim, he started this nonprofit, the Knife Hand Company, and its mission is connecting veterans with grappling martial arts studios. And his idea was that he got into grappling martial arts after service, and he found that going through that was a way to heal trauma that he had. So he started the Knife Hand Company thinking, I'm going to help other veterans find the same exact thing. Had a very interesting conversation with him about that. And let's see here, our magazine, which I just mentioned. If you're not receiving this magazine, please send us your address, your mailing address. You'll get it for free quarterly. 32 pages, as you can see. Sandra Ortega was the highlight of this particular magazine. This is a magazine for all branches, all eras. Sandra was the first Black female who was commissioned by Eisenhower. Fantastic article, mostly written by Todd throughout, though I do know that there is a letter in there from a Bataan Death March survivor through our own Henry Shepke. He connected with this veteran, and the veteran sent him a 17-page letter, which we asked if we could print that. That's also in this magazine. So if you don't receive this, please let us know. We'd be happy to get you on. It's the best way that we can get the word out about the VBC. The blood drive, I'm sure this is wrapping up soon because it's getting cold here in Pittsburgh, but if you end up donating blood, let them know that you're with the Veterans Breakfast Club, and we will get $15 for every blood donation. And finally, the shop over on our website. If you go to veteransbreakfastclub.org and check out the shop, you can get a bag of Bamboo Bob coffee. They join us periodically from Vietnam. They get coffee from there, ship it to the United States. They are a really wonderful partner of ours. If you buy a bag, VBC gets a small kickback from every bag that is sold. And I've heard it's actually really good coffee. So can't go wrong. Support a cause and support Bamboo Bob. So tonight, Top Gun, Edge of Aviation. I'm not sure if that is a official Top Gun logo there. Evan, you could probably fill me in. How are you doing tonight?
I'm good. Thanks so much for having me, and a pleasure meeting everyone on the call.
Yeah, so like I said, I'm gonna remove the let's see here, mute all upon entry. I want to unmute. Okay, everyone can unmute yourselves, I believe, if you can at this point. So if you have a question, please feel free to just raise your hand, do it here on Zoom, or put it into the chat, and we'll be sure to bring it into the program tonight. But I'll pop over to our speaker view. And Evan, I know that you and I chatted just a very brief amount of time before starting the program tonight, but I did a little bit of research, but I thought, like you said in your emails to me, you said, I'd like to go over a bit of history of the Top Gun school, which is mainly what we're here to talk about, but I can't wait to get to the fighter jets, but I figured let's start with history.
Sure. And Sean, I'm not sure if you have that photo readily available to pull up, but I could use that.
Definitely.
We can definitely use that as kind of a segue into the conversation.
This one?
Yes, that's it. Exactly. That's perfect. Yeah. So Sean, he asked me to chat about Top Gun, and I wanted to just give everyone a brief history in case some of you have not had the opportunity to read up on it, or this is your first time hearing about this institution. But Top Gun was actually founded in the middle of the Vietnam War. And what we were running into in the U.S. Air Force and Navy at the time was that the kill ratios that we had supremacy on during the Korean War, as well as World War II, had drastically dropped. And it was kind of a new age because we had not only jet technology that was pioneered the end of World War II into the Korean War, so definitely some time for that to mature. We're also now using missiles, air-to-air missiles employed from fighter jets to shoot down other fighter jets. And this was really the first war that was supposed to be fought where you never actually see the other aircraft. They thought when they were designing the F-4, which was the U.S. Navy and Air Force air-to-air supremacy fighter at the time, that they would never have to see the Soviet MiGs, that they would shoot them out at range with these beyond visual range missiles that they were employed from the jets at the time. However, as the technology was new, as well as some rules of engagement that were limiting the pilots from employing that far out at range, because they had to make a visual identification that it was indeed a North Vietnamese MiG at the time. They had to get in much closer. And as they got in closer to these other aircraft, After making that visual ID, they would employ the missile. And we were seeing at the very beginning of the war, it only had a 10% success rate of an actual air-to-air kill, 10% success rate. And that was a huge, huge drop at that time compared to what we were expecting when we designed that technology. So what they decided, the Navy was in a world of hurt, and the Navy wanted to rapidly fix this at the time because we saw our kill ratio go from 2.5 North Vietnamese MiGs to 1 US aircraft. And in the past, it was actually in the Korean War about, 12 to 1 kill ratio. So we're killing 12 North Korean aircraft to every 1 US jet down. So it was certainly a big change that they wanted to fix. So the Navy commissioned a couple of individuals to go out and do a deep dive into why we were losing air superiority, why we were having such low kill ratios, why we were having trouble downing North Vietnamese fighter jets, and why our missiles had such a low success rate, again, that 10%. And they actually commissioned a gentleman at the time named Captain Frank Alt, who was actually a World War II veteran pilot and the commander of the USS Coral Sea during the Vietnam combat operations. And it conducted an extensive study of looking not only at the missile itself, the aircraft, the tactics, but also the pilots and what errors were the result of pilot error. And the name of this report we call at Top Gun the ALT report, but really the actual name is a report of the Air-to-Air Missile System Capability Review. So very straightforward, standard government in that aspect. But overall, the report found a number of issues. One was that once these missiles that were employed from the jet made it out into combat, oftentimes they weren't being maintained properly. So the effectiveness had dropped. There was also some manufacturing fixes they had to employ to rectify some of these issues. And finally, they found that oftentimes the pilots were shooting these missiles inside the minimum range of where this missile was effective. So essentially you shoot it and the missile is going to miss, or it never detonates. The warhead never explodes because they're too close to the North Vietnamese jet, where that warhead never has an opportunity to detonate. So after they found this last point, they decided we need to fix this now. And so they actually asked out in California, in San Diego, California, a couple of gentlemen at the fleet replacement squadrons of F4s at the time to develop a curriculum that they could then teach new pilots going out to Vietnam, but also bring back some Navy pilots in theater back to the US to go through this multi-course week. So put in perspective, they got their commission. I have a date here. It was in January of 1969 when they were supposed to, this group of gentlemen had to go out and start the school, develop a curriculum, and they had their first class in March. So a little less than 3 months later in 1969. And this is the photo of the first graduating class of Top Gun in San Diego. And that was the birth of this school. And the school's mission was to have each of the instructors that were there become a subject matter expert in a different weapon system or a different tactic that the Navy employed. And those subject matter experts were supposed to go develop training material to teach each pilot that went through this course. And that same structure is still used today in the modern Top Gun up in Fallon, Nevada at this time. So that's a very brief history about why it was created, the impetus behind it, and then overall the inception of Top Gun in and of itself. And that has survived courses of decades, as well as a move from San Diego, California in the early 90s up into Fallon, Nevada for a number of reasons. And so that's the history and the birthplace of Top Gun. So, Sean, I wanted to open up to any questions that you or the group may have on why Top Gun was founded, and then I can certainly get into what modern Top Gun, the course, the structure, kind of the overall responsibilities are employed.
I guess mine is my first dumb question, and excuse me while I was setting some more things up on the back end here, if I may have missed this, but as a civilian, you think Top Gun, you think fighter jets, but I think Air Force before I thought Navy. This goes back to when I was a kid and the first movie came out, I thought Air Force as opposed to Navy. So why was it housed under the Navy?
That's a good question. I'm not too sure of that answer. I could certainly look that up and get back to y'all on that. But I know that the Navy was the one that came up with this, the big Navy. The joint or the senior admirals were the ones that said, we need to fix this. We're losing too many pilots, and we just can't keep sending our aircraft overseas or in the country with this high probability of death rate. And so that was, I know that's what they decided. And ultimately the Air Force followed suit a couple, I don't know, maybe might have been a decade later, but they ultimately had their own weapons school themselves. That's now in Nellis, Nevada. That it was modeled off of Top Gun as well.
So the F4 was one of the first?
It was, yes, the F4, and then the other aircraft was the F8 Crusader.
F8 Crusader. All right, I'd like to bring up a picture here. I think I have of the F4 because going through some stuff today, and I want to go back to the original picture here because there we go. Here's the F4 for anyone who may not have seen what an F4 is. And this isn't something that when did you enlist?
So I joined, so I went to the Naval Academy in 2004 and I graduated in 2008. So in 2008, I started flight school, which was about a 2.5-year process or schooling, I should say, until I was able to start flying the F-18 at that point. And so during that 2.5 years, I flew training aircraft. So we started off in a propeller plane. Then we went to a single engine jet trainer, actually made by the Brits, called the T-45 Goshawk. And we learned how to fly our first jets there. And then after that, if we had the grades and the spots were open in the fleet, we could then go start to fly the F-18. And so when I started flying the F-18 in March of 2011, at that point in the Navy, the only fighter jets we had was the F-18 Hornet, which is the legacy Hornet, and then the F-18 Super Hornet was the upgraded version in the mid 2000s. It started rolling out in the late 2000s. And so that's actually a picture of me flying over Big Sur, California, where I was stationed in the Central Valley of California for about 9 years. So we do a lot of our training over the water between Los Angeles and San Francisco. And so there's a big off the shore there, there's a huge training range that we also share with the Air Force, as well as Vandenberg Air Force Base, where they do some missile testing as well. And so that's where we always head out to. There's less people out there, less noise complaints for us to worry about.
Not like Norfolk. I lived there for a couple of years. You can't even, it's like it's a daily thing there. You can't sit there and say, the jets. You're like, constant. They're over your house, just
Always.
sort of circling, buzzing. I loved it personally, but this is not, is this a legacy F-18?
No, this is a Super Hornet. So this is from my first squadron.
Mm-hmm.
And there's a couple key features you can tell, but one of the biggest is, and it's a little hard to see on this photo, but the intakes for the jets are rectangular shape. And on the regular Hornet, or we call it the baby Hornet or legacy Hornet, they're actually cylindrical. And so that's one of the key identification features you can tell between a Super Hornet and then a legacy Hornet. Overall, there's a little bit of different shape in the wing. As you can see, there's kind of that notch in the wing, about 2/3 of the way down toward the wingtip. And that's add in some additional aerodynamic capabilities, but that's another one of the key features. And then the last is the leading edge stabilizer, or the Lex. And so that's, you can see it right beneath the cockpit. And so that's very wide. And then on the legacy Hornet, that's very, very narrow, almost pencil thin. overall.
Oh man, there's so many questions I have just about the Hornet because I love it.
Yeah.
I love it, but it's like I want to get back to the history. So specifically, something I think that is kind of interesting is the flight suit. And I thought maybe we could just touch on the flight suit because I want to bring back up that original picture. And I downloaded some pictures of like the current flight suit here. Let me there we are. And so we have this original picture here. These are you there in flight suit?
Sean, can you repeat that?
Are they in flight suits here?
That is, yep. That is this flight suit from the late 1960s. Yep.
Okay, and then and this is your flight suit.
Yes, that's today. That's actually my graduation from Top Gun in August of 2015.
2015. And I'm going to flip forward here to these flight suits. And I'm hoping that these are right because I just sort of was Googling and looking and finding flight suits. And trust me, if you just Google like Top Gun flight suit, all you're getting is Halloween costumes. So you have to dig a little deeper.
I can only imagine. Yeah, I'm sure some scantily clad costumes as well.
Yeah, I'm like, I don't want to buy these.
Yeah.
These aren't for me.
Yeah.
Okay, so there's something very specific about the flight suits because the type of maneuvers, the type of flying you're doing, these flight suits are built specifically for you. Is that correct?
So the suit itself, what the man is wearing there in the photo, that is on the left, the far left. That's actually just kind of what he's currently wearing. That's just they have it just like a t-shirt, like large, medium. However, the chest size does vary, much like a men's sport coat. So it could be 42L, for example. But there's not really much. It's not tailored, and so it's not unique to you. And there's actually Velcro on the sides. Now that's the suit itself, but the gear, the flight gear to the right of him in the center and off to the right, that is indeed uniquely fitted to your own body. And in fact, actually, we had some guys in my squadron. They had a little too much fun in the holidays, and they came back and they had to get their gear let out a little bit because they enjoyed their too much food and drink over the time that they had off on leave and liberty. But that flight suit's actually uniquely fit to you. And so there is a one size, and then we have in a couple an enlisted rank in the Navy called a parachute rigger, PR is the acronym. And their job in the Navy is to really maintain this flight gear. And then also they go through training in order to be able to fit each pilot specifically for this flight gear. And so they know how to maintain it, and then they also maintain the gear in the flight gear. And so within the gear, and that vest you can see on the far right is a good representation. There is there's a handheld radio in there. There is a smoke charge that releases smoke if you're down behind enemy lines. That helps signal in the helicopter coming to rescue you. There's also a CDI marker. So if we go down in the water, Navy, right? This thing just lets off a bunch of green dye in the water and helps the car or the helicopters come and find you. And then in the center photo, you can see that it looks like a giant collar around his neck. That is actually your life preserver. And so whenever that you hit the water, if you were to eject over the water, there is as soon as you hit the water, there's a mechanism in there that automatically releases your life preserver. So in case you're potentially incapacitated, maybe knocked out during your ejection, that in theory should keep you afloat when you come to. Or maybe you break your arm, which is certainly a consideration when you're ejecting out of an aircraft going 500 miles an hour. Exactly. And so you have a lot of flow injury. And so potentially a broken arm would prevent you from engaging and initiating your life preserver.
And I seem to remember one of our veterans talking about how the new suits have something that pulls your arms in an ejection because they had that too much where if you went out, the wind could break your arms.
I'm not familiar.
Okay.
That might be in some of the other aircraft. We do indeed on our ejection seats. We hook up. There is 8 points. So we hook up basically a strap around our ankles. and then a big strap around our quads. And so during an ejection, right, like the split second right before the rockets engage on the seat, there's a motor that will pull your legs in up against the ejection seat to prevent your legs from flailing at least. But our arms, we are not strapped in any way on the F-18 specifically. And that's, I think that would be very hard, just freedom of movement in the cockpit, especially in a very dynamic environment. The last thing you want is those, I assume you would not want those potential ropes around your arm, those straps, maybe getting caught in something and preventing you from fully executing the controls, especially in a dynamic situation.
And Ben Wright put in that the new suits are fireproof as well.
They
Fire
are.
resistant, not fireproof, fire resistant.
Yes, we're told not to put them in the laundry too many times.
A question from a bit back talking about the SAM missiles. Cliff, you mentioned, how did the SAM missiles work into the percentage of kill rate?
That's a good question. I'm not too sure. They also played a very important factor, and I mean, I could definitely do a deep dive on that. But they definitely played a very important factor, and that's kind of the birth of the anti-radiation missile that the U.S. has employed, or the HARM, where essentially it just homes in on the radar energy emitted from those SAM sites. And those tactics and those capabilities still exist today. And so there's a number of defenses that North Vietnamese use to kind of combat those missiles the U.S. would employ. But ultimately, maybe the missile can't home in anymore because they'd often turn off the radar sites, but it still give the pilots precious time to get in and out with the radar site not on, and therefore decrease their chances of being shot down at enemy territory.
Greg Yost had a question. What percentage of Navy fighter pilots went through the school in its first year, and then how many in the present day?
You know, I'm not too sure about where they were previously. I can definitely speak to the present day, but currently, when I went through, we had about only 24 to 28 pilots go through each year, and that was it. They had 3 total classes, about 12 to 13 pilots per class. Well, actually, no, I take it back. About 8. Usually around 8 to 9 Navy pilots each class. We did have a couple of Marines overall, but so yeah, only about 24 to 27 pilots a year go through the class.
Evan, you may not be able to answer this question from Larry Kilmeyer, but I asked Larry Guggens to unmute himself. When did they add cannons and guns to the F-4 for close in-air combat instead of relying on missiles?
Yeah, Larry, good to see you again. And
how you doing?
Yeah, I'm doing great.
Great.
Larry and I were chatting a little bit about this during the Top Gun showing, but Larry, as a Air Force pilot, can certainly talk way more to this than myself, but they did not have a cannon on the F-4 because they thought these new missiles was going to revolutionize air-to-air combat. And so they would never need a cannon on an aircraft ever again. And they quickly realized during Vietnam that was a huge error. And so they added it back on the F-4. And since then, it's been on every Navy aircraft since then in some capacity.
Yeah, the original F-4, Air Force F-4 C and Ds had a gun pod that strap on the centerline station. I didn't get over there till 1970, and I flew E models, which McDonnell Douglas put the internal gun, 20 millimeter gun in the nose, which shows in the picture that you had up there, Sean. That's an E model. But they got them up pretty quick. I will say that, believe it or not, the Air Force had a fighter weapons school in 1965. They disbanded it. And then the Navy, obviously, you know what the Navy did. You know all about that part. And I don't think it started up until like 1980.
Oh, wow.
Something like that. It may have generated sometime before that. But that's what ended up happening. And yeah, the missiles were not that effective. Had a max range and a min range, and you had to be right in the envelope. And you had to be right in there. Now we fired them down at Eglin Air Force Base out in the ocean, and yeah, they weren't 100%. They had some problems with that. Anyway, but what I remember about the Navy and how they got started is the tactics that I think all of the Air Force and Navy were using, fighter tactics, weren't working very well, as we talked about. a lot of four-ship flights, a lot of straight and level, all of that old technology. And even it was the actual Navy that finally said, this is, are we clear? Bullshit. And the Navy was the first one actually to split out and go with elements, two-ship, and fight as that the fighting body was a two-ship. And
It's like that.
and that developed, I think, into fighter weapons. The Top Gun, Air Force calls it fighter weapons school, Top Gun program that you're talking about. But it was the Navy that really came up and said, this is not the way to employ fighters the way we're doing it in 65 and 68. So thank you for doing that, getting it started again. And the Air Force did copy on, said, hey, maybe those Navy guys have an idea. Well, we'll give it a chance.
Brad Washball, going back to the flight suit, when were pilots issued sidearms?
So we would only have sidearms if we were going into combat. And so on the carrier, where we take off and land from, we go down to there'd be a dedicated room, and we check out a sidearm. And then that would be if we were flying into, for example, into Iraq or Afghanistan. And today, we wouldn't, if we were flying out over the South China Sea, probably there's a good chance we wouldn't have a sidearm. And it's really based upon the theater or the area's commander, and ultimately the posture of where we're at. So that is the reason that goes into it. But we, in a training environment or during Top Gun, we would never have a sidearm in our aircraft with us.
Also, Brad, are the vests issued on an individual basis or issued on a general basis?
They're issued on, they are issued to anyone that selects jets. And then at that point, they tailor the vest size to you. And so it looks like basically like a spider's web. And so they'll actually take out a lot of the straps in there, and they'll reconform it to your body size, your torso dimensions from there.
And he asked, what is the washout rate for Top Gun?
It certainly varies. When I was going through, we're averaging about one pilot, probably 1 to 2 pilots a year. They really do try, because it's so selected to begin with. Through that selection process, they try to ensure to the max extent practical that the person they select would not wash out. And then that way it improves their chances. And if someone's very struggling, much like any university you're at, they're going to give you the resources to try to get through extra instruction, for example. But sometimes at the end of the day, there's a lot of hand-eye coordination. We call it stick and rudder skills that some people it just doesn't click. And so unfortunately that happens. Another reason why someone may wash out is they're not a good teacher, or they're not very approachable, because the whole point of Top Gun today's Navy, is to develop instructors. It's to develop instructors and to develop subject matter experts. We are not supposed to graduate like Top Gun 1, the movie, and then go right back out in the combat. We learned that the hard way at the beginning of World War II, unlike the Japanese, where we would actually send our seasoned pilots back to the US to teach the incoming pilots. And then the Japanese actually kept their seasoned pilots in combat, and therefore it just increased the likelihood that they'd go down. So the new recruit, the new pilot coming out of Japan at the time, was nowhere near the same level as the US, the US Navy.
And that's a good segue into your particular story. Did you want to always be Top Gun, or is that something you decided on, and how did you get selected? I think you got muted. Yeah. And here, let me, sorry, hold on one sec. There.
Sorry, my 5-year-old was coming up. She was trying to sneak in to
Oh,
get in the photo here. Yeah.
He's welcome at any time. I have a 2-year-old who does the same.
Yeah.
So
that's why I muted myself, because she was calling my name.
Yeah. So did you always think Top Gun? What made you think Top Gun, and how did you get selected?
I and I'm sure Larry can attest to it too, but we're very much, there's a lot of type A personalities. And so when I was going through flight school, nothing was guaranteed. So my goal in flight school was to get jets, try to go fly F-18s in the fleet was my goal. And then once I got to my first squadron, I had a very, our instructor, our training officer, who was a Top Gun graduate himself, was a mentor of mine, like a huge role model. And I really looked up to this man. He was a great teacher. He was an incredible pilot. And I thought to myself, I want to be like him. And so at that point, I really dedicated myself to learning the tactics, getting in the books, improving my teaching ability for our junior pilots in our squadron to help them and mentor them as they were just starting off. And ultimately, the more I did that, the more I realized I liked that. And therefore, I at the end of that tour, I put an application to apply. And at that point, once you put in your application, you need to find recommendations, just like you would for college. And so we had to go out and find other Top Gun graduates that we had flown with that could attest to our skills, but also could attest to our personality, that we're approachable, we're easygoing, because we want to be teachers first and foremost. And then finally, can they teach? Like, I've seen them teach the tactics. They can get to, they're very comfortable teaching to the very senior admirals down all the way to the brand new pilot in the squadron. And so that whole process is part of the application where you get recommendations, then you put in your application, and then ultimately you have we call it a rush ride, but you typically try to go up to Fallon to fly with the instructors at Top Gun and then allow them to see your skills and your capabilities. And then all that gets put together in a package, and then it's sent up, and then the Top Gun instructors get in a room and they look at all the different people that have applied. They look at the recommendations they've received from other prior graduates. They also get the backdoor texts or emails like, hey, don't choose this guy, or this person's he's I can attest, like, I'm not blowing smoke up your butt. This person is easily someone you want. Mm-hmm. So that's kind of the whole selection process. And I was fortunate. I had the opportunity to head up there and see if I could pass.
What did it mean to you when you got the acceptance letter?
That's when the nerves started kicking in. I was like, I got a lot of work to do between now and then. I was excited for the opportunity. And I wanted to get up there and start to learn, but also to demonstrate that I have what it takes to graduate, and be, most importantly, an instructor. And so I did a lot of practice ahead of time, a lot of studying, where you study the tactics, you study your ability to teach, you study your ability to debrief the actual flight evolution, which is a whole nother topic we can chat about. Sometimes those last upwards of 8 hours as debriefs, but and so I really dived into it, and fortunately had a very understanding wife at the time when I was working long days and weekends.
When you say tactics, are you talking air to air, or mm-hmm. all the technical aspects of the tactics you will need in the field?
It is all the maneuvers that we do with the jet, and specifically, there's different. So we build that is now one of the big parts of Top Gun, is not only you teacher, but you also develop the next generation of tactics. And so a lot of these Top Gun instructors, they go work hand in hand in today's world with the defense contractors. And they're working with Raytheon to develop the next generation US missile. They work with Boeing, who makes the F-18, on unlocking new software capabilities. They work again with Raytheon on the radars on our jet. And so they work with not only the defense contractors, but also with the intel community. And so we're constantly getting updates of potential nations of interest that are developing new technology that we could see ourselves going up against in the future. And so we take the intel, we then work with the defense contractors, then we take what is possible from that man in the box or the pilot's standpoint, what they can do. And then we work to build new maneuvers and new overall strategy, I guess is the best way to describe it, in the air to defeat nation X and their jets. I mean, we just call it like potentially Russia, right? We work to see what Russia's technology is, what we need, what strategy, what maneuvers we need to do to defeat it, but then also ensure that our missiles are successful. And so that's a big point of that. And we do a lot of that testing through simulators ahead of time. And simulators is becoming a massive, massive part of any aviation in today's world because it's so much cheaper than sending up all these aircraft that are like, unfortunately, like very much driven by computers. We always say that we are a 49% voting member in the cockpit. The jet is 51%, and the computers. And so if we ask the throttle and the stick to do one thing, the computers in the aircraft and the F-18 are like, I see you want to do that. That's how you're going to get yourself killed. Or instead, we're going to do this. And so it almost like backs us up. And I think the F4 is very different. Like when Larry was flying, but it's the aircrafts they design today are just inherently unstable, where you cannot fly it without a computer. Like if you lose your computer, the aircraft will crash because it's so aerodynamically unstable. It can't fly like a commercial airliner that could glide, for example, or a small Cessna single engine propeller plane. Like these aircraft are so unstable because that helps with your aerodynamic maneuverability. And so with the aerodynamic laws there, the more unstable you are naturally, the more maneuverable you are in a jet. And that's just that's where we're at.
God, that's a great point. And I do have video to share in just a little bit of a couple maneuvers of an F-22, like a J-turn, falling leaf. These maneuvers that you see a plane do, you're like, that's completely unnatural. And now it completely makes sense that the computer is really aiding the pilot to be able to pull some of these off. Because I would understand that it would take incredible skill to pull off any one of these maneuvers, and everyone will see it in the video because you see it and you're like, this doesn't look like it's real. It looks like computer generated. But I unmuted Larry again because I thought that he might be like, I didn't really have those computers back then. It was all stick and runners, right?
No, we didn't have too much of that. The first F4s that flew in Vietnam didn't have a computer. It would not do what you wanted it to do. I can even share with you, if you were in a very high G left-hand turn and got down to a very high angle of attack, it would actually flip the airplane the other direction because of the adverse yaw. And the next thing would do in the old F4s would actually go into a flat spin, which were normally unrecoverable. So now you had to fly that to the airplane, and then was later when they started adding the computers to help you out, thank goodness. But you could not do the same maneuvers you're going to show, Sean, when you're going to show them here. And the F4 couldn't do too much of that. It just made, all it did was take JP4 and turn it into noise and smoke at the time.
Evan, this is from the chat. Do the airplane's pilot and RIO, which you may have to define for me, go through the Top Gun? Go through Top Gun as a team?
Typically, no. I had some friends of mine that they met their Rio in Top Gun. They said, this is going to be your Rio, from a whole nother squadron out on the East Coast, for example, when he was on the West Coast. So unlike the movie, you typically don't go through with your squadron mate that you're currently in. And it's and they do that because that's also a new dynamic. You're learning one another. And so if you can learn as a pilot to work with your new Rio in a very stressful situation, such as Top Gun class, which lasts 3 months, then you can easily teach new Rios. And we call them NFOs in the F-18 community. Rio is an F-14 term, which stands for Radar Intercept Officer. And now it's just the Naval Flight Officer, and specifically the F-18, it's WISO, WSO, Weapons System Officer, is what we say in the F-18. Rio is unique to the F-14. Yeah.
Sean, can I ask a question? Do they ever put a stick in the back seat?
They do. There's only four. There's four F-18s that have a stick in the back in the whole Navy.
All right.
And they do that during your first couple of flights in the F-18, so that because this is your first time flying it, they don't want you to go up there and then the instructor in the back have no way of controlling the aircraft. So
Just-
they say, we don't trust you. We're going to give you, we're actually going to be following the controls.
With a sticker on the side that says student driver.
Yeah,
The
pretty
reason I
much.
asked, I'm sorry, Sean, the reason I asked is the F4 does. The
Mhm.
F4 and the following aircraft have a stick in the back seat so you can fly from the back seat. The Navy never did it. And the Air Force puts a weapons systems officer in the back seat, which is what I was in Vietnam in '70. And then, of course, I transitioned to the front seat. But yeah, the Navy never had a control in the back seat. I know it didn't happen in the F4 for sure, and I'm sure many others don't.
This brings up an interesting question, and maybe it's a bit ahead of ourselves, but the idea that each branch has a different version of the plane. I know the F-35, which we'll get to later. You know, the Marines wanted one that could take off vertically, and the Navy wanted a particular version. So why make it that way? Why can't you make it consistent so that everybody across branches, if they needed to, could fly for the other?
Sean, you're getting into politics.
Oh, we don't talk politics.
Yeah, but one of the big reasons why is that if there's enough common parts, then they could be mass produced, and therefore there's more readily available that could be swapped between services.
Mhm.
Same thing. However, when the concept was, if we had the F-35 and it's between 3 services, we want to make it interchangeable where it can complete unique missions tailored to each service. So Air Force, the F-35, you'll see has very short, stubby wings because it doesn't need to land on an aircraft carrier. And it doesn't need to go slow to land on an aircraft carrier. The Navy, the F-35C, has very large, wide wings because it needs to be very slow when it lands on an aircraft carrier in order to catch the wire. And then because the Air Force has like a 9,000-foot runway, so it doesn't need to be slow when it first touches down. It can go as fast and then just use that entire runway to slow down. The Navy, we have tens of feet, so like and a cable we got to catch. And then the Marines said, that's a cool idea, but we take off and land vertically from our small carriers or our LHDs. And so the Lockheed Martin defense contractor is like, oh, I think we can make that happen. And so they said, yeah, we'll give you a vertical land and takeoff capability. Well, what they quickly found is by doing that, they actually made it more complex. And so that's why the F-35 was supposed to be ready for deployments in all services in the early 2010s. And here we are, the Navy just had their first F-35 deployed on a carrier in 2021. And so they found that complexity added on in efforts to have commonality to a certain extent, delayed and made it much more difficult to complete.
Cliff also mentioned, if you washed out, did it hurt your career?
No, it definitely did not hurt career. It showed that you were hungry, like you really wanted to have that opportunity. And I know some people that tried to apply again, and maybe they didn't go through as a pilot, but they did go back and become a adversary pilot, which is a whole nother thing. So Top Gun is broken into, they call it blue tactics instructors. And so, or blue patch wearer is what we call it. So you focus on U.S. tactics, or Navy strategy and maneuvering. Then there's a red or an adversary Top Gun graduate. And so those Top Gun graduates are supposed to specialize in mimicking other countries' tactics. And what they do is they then train dedicated Navy reservists to fly F-18s, F-4s, some F-16s from the Air Force to mimic the capabilities of other countries. And then, because they're the subject matter experts or the experts in those other countries' tactics, then that turns for the blue or the actual strike fighter tactics instructor, they then can use them to practice a lot of these new strategies and maneuvering that they're developing or tactics. And so that's what it comes down to. So there's 2 different schools. And then there's a third actually, which teaches the airborne intercept control, but essentially the people in the E2s off the carriers or in the cruisers that have the giant radars that find other aircraft and then help guide U.S. Navy aircraft to go intercept those other ones. So there's 3 schools total. up there.
And your particular one, which one did your particular one you went through?
I went through the blue. So
Blue.
the actual US tactics one.
Okay.
And that's the most prestigious. And that's off of the, the original Top Gun. That was the whole point to it.
Can you take us through it like a typical day? Like you get there, what was your first day like, and how did you, sort of navigate through those 3 months?
So we started off with lectures where we sat down with the actual Top Gun instructors, and they would lecture to us their specific subject matter. So we had some lectures on foreign nations capabilities. We had lots of volleyball, foreign nations capabilities. Then we had our technology, like our missiles. Like we learned the ins and the outs. I'm talking to the detail of how these things were made, its capability, what it could do, what are its weaknesses, and then how we can better employ that. Then we learned the actual strategy. That was the next part. And so we would call it ground school. So we would go through different phases. There was a total of 4 different phases. And before each phase, we'd sit through about 3 to 4 days of 12-hour lectures with only a lunch break, for an hour lunch break. Then once we completed those lectures, then we go out and we do simulators. And so then we do simulators, and we'd have to practice briefing. So we not only do you learn how to be a good pilot, you also have to learn how to teach and brief this mission to someone that doesn't know what they're doing. And so then you learn how to brief this material as a pre-flight brief to what you're about to go out and do. You fly the mission. You're supposed to take notes on what you did wrong, what you did right while flying the jet. You land, and then you got to go into a debrief about what you did wrong and then what you did right. And so it starts off big picture, like a God's eye view of different planes flying around. You can see distances, you can test the strategy. Then you get into your tapes where it records the displays, like your radar, for example, in the jet, and you can critique your mechanics in the aircraft of how you got a radar lock, how you employed your missile, how you shot the gun, how you maneuvered the aircraft. And so all said and done, between the prep, we'd start our days maybe around like 5. Sometimes we have briefs that start at 5:30 a.m. in the morning. Mm-hmm. We'd brief from 5:30 to about 7 a.m. Then we go out to the jet, start it up, do all that sequence, take off. Then we execute the mission for about an hour to an hour and a half. We land, and then we go on to about a 9 to 10 hour debrief afterwards. Oof. So we're looking at 16 to 18 hour days, because that also includes the prep, all the preparation you were doing as a student to prepare for that flight. And maybe we'd hop in the simulator with our friends to go practice before we went out with the instructors, so we wouldn't embarrass ourselves. So that would be a typical day. So so that'd be like the day. And so in summary, we do ground school for 3 to 4 days of lectures, 12 hours a day. We do a couple of days of simulators, then we actually do the flights, and then we repeat that 3 more times. And it would last a total of 3 months, 12 weeks.
That answers my question of how well do you know the ins and outs of your particular aircraft? Because I can go jump in my Subaru and drive it, but I only know, a handful of things about it. But, you know everything, top to bottom, every inch of it, what it's doing and what it can do and what it needs to do.
We do. We actually don't focus so much on the systems in the aircraft itself. We focus more so on the missiles and our radar. Mm-hmm. And so that's actually what's much more our time is devoted towards. And the actual systems of the F-18 aircraft itself, we devote at that phase in our career, we would devote very little time to learning, because the intent is that we've already mastered that prior to even going to Top Gun. And so the focus is on the strategy, the maneuvering, the tactics itself.
And Brad brings up a good point. You're doing all of this over the course of 3 months with what Hollywood dramatized as very, very extreme personalities and dudes there's not that much competition. Is that right in Top Gun? Is it very competitive? Just like in the movie where they had everybody competing with each other, or is it everybody's here and we're all trying to help each other out?
Both, I'd say. So everything is graded. You're always comparing yourself to one another because you want to be the best. Type A personalities. You even have boards like whiteboards up that shows the number of valid air-to-air kills you've had. And so every flight that'll tick up for each person in the class. So you can always compare yourself. But ultimately, at the end of the day, we do want each other to succeed. And so if it wasn't for the team effort of how much time we all spent outside of the flights and the briefs and the lectures of quizzing each other, practicing in the simulators together, we wouldn't get through. And also sharing like our mistakes. We told our buddy that was up later that day, like, hey, I made this mistake. Watch out for this. And that is a huge part. So it's very much a competitive camaraderie or collaborative environment is what I describe it as. Competitive collaboration. It's the best way.
From Greg in the chat, he says, to make it realistic, when you actually practice, quote unquote, the dogfighting, do you live on and take off from carriers just to make the training realistic?
No, actually, we're only in Fallon, Nevada. And so this whole time we are taking and landing every day back in Fallon, Nevada, which is, if you're not familiar with it, that is located in the northwest portion of Nevada. And if you're familiar with Lake Tahoe, Reno area, it's just about an hour drive west or east of Reno, Nevada.
I think that's a good, I am not Todd when it comes to history, but supposedly, and this is what I saw on Facebook today. It's so interesting that it was today. On this day in 1910, a Curtiss pusher piloted by Eugene Ely took off from the USS Birmingham, becoming the first aircraft to take off from a warship. The pusher plunged as soon as it left the deck, but Ely was able to keep it flying even as the wheels dipped into the water. So a bit of his, you've taken off and landed on aircraft carriers. I'll have a video to show while you're chatting about it, because I'd like to hear a bit about what that's like.
It's like a roller coaster, taking off specifically. It's like a roller coaster, like amped up. And so it is an experience that never gets old. During the day, during the night, it's terrifying. We could talk about that here in a second. But then landing during the day is exhilarating. It's just to see the boat, the wind, and just watching the rush over the carrier once you reach the actual flight deck itself is unbelievable.
Here it comes. It's coming right in now.
And so you can kind of see the wake, and then that's all it takes, and then you're down. And you hope you touch down successfully.
As you can see, this is like a 20-minute video, but everybody's only watched this like 10 seconds of the actual landing.
Yeah.
And if you've hit that, caught the cable or not, right?
Oh yeah, your entire body is thrown forward, because as soon as the cable catches, even with you're strapped into your ejection seat, your entire body lurches forward. So you can tell immediately if you caught. And so you're almost anticipating it. If you know you touch down, because you can feel the jet just slam, like the suspension drops, the whole jet drops, your body drops in the seat, the seat physically drops as the jet drops. You could tell shortly thereafter if you caught it, because then you're just thrown forward. So it's a crash, and then you're like tossed forward. If you miss it and you anticipate it, you know that you take back off. You're like, okay, I guess.
In the wires.
Sorry, hold on. I'm getting a bit of.
And the airbox has to tell you to pull the power off, so it makes them slight.
I'm not sure where I'm getting the extra noise from, but okay, that seems to have. Okay, there we go. I think it was Robert. Sorry, Robert, I had to mute you. Say that last part again, Evan. I'm sorry. We lost that.
It was fine. Yeah. So as soon as you touch down, and you're supposed to go full power just in case you miss the cable. And so therefore, if you don't catch the cable, then you're going to take right back off. And it's pretty evident within a matter of seconds.
Larry asked a good question here about that. And this bleeds into like my two bucket list items. One, I would love to do a vertical takeoff in an F-18. I feel like I've watched them do it, and I think it would just be incredible to experience. But Larry also asked, because I think getting shot off like a cannon off an aircraft carrier is probably pretty cool too. Do you feel any drop after you take off of the catapult? I know that a COD prop aircraft, you feel a bit of a drop.
You do, especially when you have ordnance on it. You can definitely feel the jet drop slightly overall. And yeah, you certainly do. It'll drop slightly. Other times, if you don't have much ordnance on it, then that thing it'll shoot away very easily. And we also train in the case that we call it a soft cat or soft catapult launch, where the steam then drives your launch bar on the catapult itself. Maybe didn't have all the steam behind it, where it doesn't get you the required speed to get fully airborne. And so we train in the simulators of how that's supposed to look, because we can only simulate so much of the actual environment, how it feels. But and so that's always a consideration we're prepared for.
Larry, you have a question, then we'll do our station break.
There's two Larrys. It wasn't me that was asking the
Oh,
question.
that was Larry Kilmeyer.
It wasn't
Sorry.
me. I don't really care. I do any of those things. And I don't want to land on a carrier. I'm just joking, of course. It's got to be exhilarating. But in the Air Force, the F4 had a hook also. So we'd take a barrier at the runways. We had utility failure. But anyway, that's all. I just want to let you know that I'll give you a call if I have a question. Can I say one thing, John? It won't take long.
Oh yeah, totally.
Everything that Evan just talked about and the mission that we went through, every training mission that I'll just say fighter pilots go through the same thing, but not to that extent. The briefing, the flight, the debriefing, the camaraderie, can't say that, and the will to do better than your buddy. But it's kind of unique, and I don't even know how to explain it. Evan, maybe you can. Although you're competitive and you're trying to be better than the next guy, you also want the next guy to be better than you. Because it's just like anybody that's in the service, it's the other guy that's going to save your butt. So you want him to be as good, but you just want to be just that little bit better than the one you're doing. But
healthy competitiveness.
Yeah, that's good words. But thank you, Evan. That's great story.
So true, Larry. So true.
Just a quick station break here. We are the Veterans Breakfast Club. Our mission is creating communities of listening around veterans and their stories to connect, educate, heal, and inspire. Want to make a small announcement here and put a link into the chat. Evan, we just chatted briefly with Julia right before the program started. Julia was featured in a Washington Post article, which was then also reprinted by Stars and Stripes here. Recently, this was just Veterans Day on Friday. I will put the link to this article in the chat. You can listen to it or read through it. Wonderful article originally by the Washington Post. So congratulations, Julia. Julia, I'll ask you to unmute. Are you able to?
I'm so happy to be able to.
How was talking with the Washington Post about this?
Oh, the man's name was Dave Kendi, and he was very pleasant, very nice. And he said when he did the interview, he said that it would not be on until sometime later. He said he writes these things and he never knows. They don't tell him when it's going to be published. So anyway, it came out on Friday. They held it till Veterans Day from sometime in September. But they were very nice, and it was very successful. It was a great write-up. My goodness, I was really surprised. I heard from, would you believe, a friend in New Guinea who read it on her computer, her smartphone, whatever she has, I don't know. But she said, I just saw this article and I had to call you. So, and one from New Zealand came through. I said, gee, the Washington Post must have a lot of spread. That's all I can think of.
Definitely. Well, when they did the Jim Roberts, when you were reconnected with the Donut Dolly, you're on with us tonight. Whenever Washington Post highlighted your story, it's a great newspaper, and we're happy to have a couple people here who've been highlighted in it recently. I want to keep the good times rolling with that. But congratulations, Julia. And I put the link in the chat for the stripes.com article. I do believe if you look it up on Washington Post, if you don't have a subscription, you won't be able to read it. You need a subscription for Washington Post, but I believe with Stars and Stripes, you get some free articles like throughout the month. So check out the Stars and Stripes version, which is the same article.
Yeah, that's true.
I will put a link to our survey here before the end of the program. So if you have any thoughts about the program, thoughts about how VBC can be better, or just, would like to chat with us about it, the survey is like 4 questions long. It takes like 3 minutes. So I'll put that survey link into the chat by the end of the program. But I wanted to get back to Evan with sort of like the generations of fighters. We talked about the F4, and Brad had a question earlier in the chat about how long a generation lasts before the next generation comes out. And I put a couple, some slides in here of after the F4, like what we graduated to. And you'll have to excuse me because maybe some of these weren't used by Top Gun. So I'd be interested to hear maybe some, maybe a bit of information about each if we have any.
Yes. So so this one specifically, the F-15 Strike Eagle. So there's 2 different versions of it. There's
Right, there we go.
a C model, which is more focused on air-to-air combat, so dogfighting or missiles, and then the F-15E and F, I think it's the F, yeah, Strike Eagle. That is focused more so their mission on air-to-ground employment, so dropping bombs, dropping missiles against targets on the ground, and they're really supposed to be in there with the Army or the Marines as they roll in the country, providing close air support, providing air cover or dropping bombs as those on the ground need it in a situation where there's a tank or they're being overrun, et cetera, called close air support. So that's their primary job overall. And so these have been around for quite some time. It's another Boeing product. Or McDonnell Douglas, I think originally then Boeing bought it. But they, so these have been around. So they can really extend the life of a lot of aircraft by upgrading the avionics, because that's the quickest thing that becomes irrelevant in fighters is your radar, your defensive countermeasures, because each jet has defensive countermeasures within the aircraft itself, and then ultimately some of the other sensors that are used. And so those can be upgraded. So for example, those were upgraded in the Legacy Hornet. You should always think like anytime an aircraft is finally operational in the fleet or in a squadron, that technology is usually about at least a decade old. And so that just shows you how long it takes to develop and then test. In today's aircraft development, it's much quicker decades ago when the computers didn't play such a large role in the complexity. And so that can kind of give you a frame of reference there.
David Siever put in the chat, the MO on the back of this particular picture of the F-15 on the tail means Mountain Home AFB Idaho 366th Fighter Wing.
Huh.
Thank you, David.
Yeah, I know that the Air Force usually has their tags. They're usually tied to their base or their unit. The Navy, their tailed numbers are usually tied to their aircraft carrier. So there's different letters, and those letters usually are tied to what aircraft what aircraft carrier you would deploy under.
One thing I wanted to ask, because I always see whenever I've met a couple Top Gun pilots through the VBC, and anytime I bring up the idea of the call sign, because that's the thing that sort of really sticks out to you from the Top Gun movie is Maverick, Iceman, but it always seems like the call sign, are you given that? Does everybody like their call sign? How do you get one?
No, usually, so everyone is given a call sign. That's number one. Number two is that usually it's something you despise, but you can't let other people know that you hate it. You kind of have to play the game like, oh yeah, it doesn't bother me, but really it does bother you.
Well, yeah, I mean, if I went through Top Gun and they were like, "You're a hamster," I'd be mad. I'd be like, "Kidding me?" But okay. And Navy, when do you get it?
Usually, they start to give you call signs during flight school, and then usually by your first F-18 squadron where you deploy, that's usually where your call sign gets solidified. It can change. You have to do something either really funny or really egregious for it to change. But typically the Navy's call signs are usually humiliating in some sort. And it's all just, it's all good natured fun. Like and it's not like, anything bad or anything, but it's usually like either giving you a hard time about some incident in your life, or maybe in the aircraft, or with your buddies. And it just kind of sticks with you. Or maybe it's a play on your name, like your last name, for example.
So what is your call sign?
My call sign is noodler, like catfish noodling.
Okay.
I can't tell you all the true story behind it. It's not the right environment. I'd be more than happy to, maybe at a bar over a drink, but not here over line.
Fair
But
enough.
I think I told some of the people here before, like I had a good friend, his call sign was mouth breather, because anytime he walked around, he always had his mouth hanging wide open. So everyone thought it was real funny because he just all the time. And sure enough, that was pinned on the side of a jet. Yeah.
That would have changed Top Gun the movie very much
Yeah.
if it was mouth breather as opposed
Yeah.
to mouth breather. Baltimore Ben, you asked, are they like jersey numbers where no two people on the same team can have the same call sign?
There are some repeat call signs because they're for such funny incidents that have happened. Sometimes things happen again, believe it or not. And so they decide, okay, we're going to repeat this. And so I have had to say, like, okay, it's call sign with the last name. Because then someone would be like, do you mean this person or this person? Like, oh, no, it's that person from that squadron. But that does not happen often. Not happen often.
I do want to get up to the F-22, so we'll continue on here. F-16 Falcon.
Yep, that's another Air Force airplane. And so that one, also, they have a couple mixed roles, but also supposed to support the air-to-ground mission, a close air support. There's also a special version built off the F-4 Wild Weasels from Vietnam that's supposed to be really targeting surface-to-air missile systems and clearing the path for strikes in the enemy country that way. So there's a couple different versions of the F-16. So there's slight modifications, and because there's such warfare is so complex, a lot of times you designate certain aircraft or different modifications of aircraft to a specific mission set in order to be a better expert and more properly and effectively employed.
Of course,
Yep, that's a Super Hornet.
Yep.
You can tell by that. You see the leading edge, the Lex, much bigger than the Legacy Super Hornet there, and then that little wing notch to cut.
What made the F-18 really stand out? Because it's been around for quite a long time.
The Navy, it was supposed to be, and I could be incorrect here with my going back into history, but there was supposed to be another aircraft that was supposed to replace it. And so they're actually going to build an F-22 version for the Navy. They found that it's just so expensive. Salt water and carrier operations are just so corrosive on the synthetic materials oftentimes used on aircraft these days. It was not feasible or conducive. So they scrapped that program. And so the Navy said, well, while we develop the next generation technology, why don't we take the F-18 and then plus it up and then improve the size, improve its gas, how much it can carry, and then also how much ordnance, how many weapons it can carry to. And then let's improve all the avionics, the electronics. And that's how the Super Hornet came out of the Legacy Hornet. They also did it to standardize parts and maintenance. Because at that time, before the Super Hornet, you had the F-14 Tomcat, and then you had the F-18 Legacy Hornet, the A through D models. And there's just so much, you had to have different maintainers. You couldn't swap parts. If maybe one squadron was missing a part that another one had an extra of, you couldn't just do that one-for-one swap because they're completely different aircraft. So in the vein of efficiency, the Navy said, we're going to go all F-18s that have very common parts. That'll help improve our maintenance supply chains out at sea. If a lot of parts are being destroyed in combat, et cetera, and then also improve the training of our pilots so they can be swapped between aircraft. So let's say like I'm in one squadron on an aircraft carrier, I have a bunch of sick pilots, but now I can get other pilots from another squadron to go fly their jets because they're qualified to fly the same jet. And so that adds a lot of interoperability and swapping of parts and personnel to improve efficiency.
F-22.
That's a airport. The pure air superiority fighter. It's an incredible machine. There's just no better way to describe it. Absolutely incredible. There's no one in the world that can replicate it. Other countries have tried. It's nowhere near as capable as this plane. It is absolutely unbelievable. I fought a couple, and it's using the Super Hornet. Believe it or not, be very careful here. The Super Hornet has better radar. Well, I'm not going to go down that route, but the Super Hornet does have some better capabilities. But this plane is just so powerful and so capable that it can overcome it's some of its shortcomings, some of its smaller deficiencies.
And bringing up I think the F2, I loved the F-18, but then I saw the F-22 and I was like,
who doesn't? It's okay. Yes.
It's like seeing Brad's Corvette, and I'm like, that's a beautiful Corvette. But then I see the 2022 version, and I'm like, that's a beautiful Corvette. It's like, how do you pick?
Yeah, it's an unbelievable airplane.
Well, I have the video.
What it can do and how high and fast it can go. It's just it's in a league of its own. Truly,
this is some of the maneuvering I have. I got this video today of, I think it's falling leaf maneuver, J turn, and tail slides. So the couple maneuvers that you'll see on your screen here in a sec. This is the maneuverability that we were talking about with the F-22, and probably, like you said, the computer system helping this out. It's a much longer video than we're not going to play all 7 minutes, but this gives us an idea of what the F-22 does. I mean, that's falling leaf, correct?
Mm-hmm. Or this is falling leaf right there.
That looks like a tail slide, and that's a J turn.
Mm-hmm. They're just, they're also, there's so much power to it as well. So you can, if you mind pausing there, Sean.
Sure.
If you look back at its overall exhaust, you can see, so it has a technology called thrust vectoring, and the Russians have this too, and the Chinese are following up. But it allows it to do those almost stopping and turning on a dime by maneuvering the nozzles in addition to the actual wings itself. And so therefore, it's like adding in a whole nother surface to help maneuver your aircraft by maneuvering the direction of the thrust coming out, in addition to vectoring the airplane just with your wing surfaces to begin with.
Greg Yost asked in the chat, do training programs like these address only enemy air-to-air tactics, or are there specialized training exercises designed to address unique AAA or SAM tactics known to be used by various potential adversaries?
All the above. So everything is taken into consideration. The Navy, we like to say that we are a jack of all trades, and that we do every mission. Now we're slowly getting away, we're starting to get away from that with the F-35. We do all missions where it's air-to-air, dogfighting, addressing surface-to-air systems, close air support. The Air Force is much more specialized, and that's where we say we are good enough to be lethal, but we're not amazing, or not like experts like the Air Force is in a lot of these fields. And so the Air Force has made the decision that we're going to have certain aircraft, certain squadrons specialize in certain mission sets. The Navy is like, we don't have that luxury. We're an aircraft carrier. Can only carry so many planes, so you all are gonna have to do everything. Good luck. Just don't kill yourselves.
That's what I want to do right there.
Yeah.
Straight up in the air. Just incredible. Yeah, watching how this thing maneuvers, and it's unrealistic what it's able to do. And you're pulling G's. Like, can you give me a bit of like step-by-step Mach and G's and what you're experiencing in your body as you start pulling? Of course, Top Gun Maverick said, they're going to pull 10 G's, and that's, it's going to knock you out. What is that experience like in your body?
Well, everyone's different. I can attest to that. Like, everyone has a different experience or reaction and a threshold tolerance. For me, some of the, thinking back on it, I remember like my face almost like sinking in, like the skin in my cheek sinking into my jawline, my eyes, like my eyelids almost being shut over top of my eyes. my whole body being like sandwiched into the actual seat. And so that increases the higher you get in G's, but also the period that you're pulling those G's. So the longer you're pulling those G's, just the more pronounced that is. And I mean, it's also, I think we talked about in some of your other programming, but with your flight suit, you also have a special pants that essentially like have balloons in them, and they blow up as the jet starts to pull more G's. The computer says, okay, we need to help the pilot out. We're going to pump air into these balloons in their pants that help keep the blood up in your heart and your brain, and prevent it from pooling under G forces in your lower extremities, thus leading to blacking out. And so that also helps aid in your tolerance overall, in addition to special breathing, a Hick maneuver, and that hasn't changed in decades, but because it's that effective. So those are all things that we do to help mitigate the G's, but it is something that I remember some flights, especially dogfighting, where I'd be pulling G's for so long that I'd watch my vision start to come into tunnel vision, and I knew I had to stop pulling the G's or I was about to black out flying around. And that's, a lot of pilots have gone through that when you're pulling some pretty intense maneuvers.
Now, these maneuvers, is this something that it's like, you know, you could do them at a show, but is this something you could actually pull off in an air-to-air combat situation where you're in it and you're like, I'm going to pull a J turn?
We, to be honest, Sean, we in today's environment, we shouldn't ever be in that close to another aircraft.
Good
if
point.
we did, we messed up. Or maybe due to jamming, we could not get a radar lock where now we're going to be close. But dogfighting is still very, very important because oftentimes maybe that's the case. Like you can't get an accurate shot until you get close, or maybe we don't have a good identification of that aircraft and we need to ID it, make a visual, confirm airborne that is indeed an enemy. So a lot of these maneuvers are not something you do like in quick succession like they do. There's like a specific time and place for them. I can't speak too much to like what the F-35, when it would do these tactics specifically. I can only speak to like the F-18, haven't gone through that, like the dogfighting syllabus. And there's certainly certain things that you would want to do, but a lot that you see from the F-18 demo team that goes out and does these maneuvers at air shows are very rarely incorporated into the actual dogfighting itself.
So you can see the F-35, the F-22 sort of, it's almost like they skipped over it. Like they only produced so many F-22s and then they just decided to move right on to the F-35.
They had planned to make thousands of them, and it was just so expensive. And also the end of the Cold War too, right? And so the F-22 was developed, the Cold War, so as to combat the Russians. 90s, when wall fells are like, well, there's just no need for this aircraft. So they cut production and they said, okay, we're going to cap it. It's like in the high 180s. As opposed to like thousands of them. Now, the F-35 was built for the mission set, and I have to be careful here, but the mission is really to break enemy air defense systems and enemy radar sites to allow other aircraft like the F-18 to come in and drop bombs. And so it's really supposed to get into very highly defended enemy territory. The F-35 should not be doing a lot of the dogfighting. It should not be shooting a lot of the missiles. It often is in the air-to-air environment. It's often the quarterback. It helps direct the F-18s in different capacities to do things through various, best way to describe it, like various communication sources. So it'll say like, hey, you should go over here. Do this F-18. They're much more the quarterback.
I also included in this this slide deck here, I believe that's a Russian Su-57.
Yep, that's their attempt at making an F-22, or the first stealth fighter jet, I should say. So
you hear a lot of, in watching Top Gun Maverick, they say fifth generation fighters like 17 times throughout the movie. And this is what it is. Fifth generation is F-35, Su-57, and the China's FC-31.
And the F-22.
And the F-22.
That's in there too.
What do you know about the Su and the FC? Are they as advanced? As much detail as able to say, but what are your thoughts on those four aircraft? Which one has the superiority?
Sean, honestly, I can't say too much, but
That's fine.
I will say, so I can say this. So the Su-57 right here, currently during the Ukraine-Russian war, the photo surfaced on the internet that's widely available that shows the Su-57, their wings. And so this is supposed to be a stealth aircraft, meaning like all the materials are supposed to be very smooth. You don't see any ridges. You don't see the bolts and the actual like bolting together the pieces. And because each of those little divots and cracks reflects radar energy back and therefore makes you easier to see from an enemy. Well, a picture surface where they like basically just use like car bolts of drilling down their wings. And so that in and of itself highly defeats the purpose of their stealth. So that's a good example. So I can speak so for Russia, for example, they have a lot of interesting a lot of capable technology, but it's still very much rudimentary in different capacities. Yeah.
Okay, so obviously the movies, if you haven't seen Top Gun Maverick, pretty incredible. He takes an F-14 up, I'm not spoiling anything, and then he has a fight against the fifth generation. Do you trust your skills enough that you could take an F-14 up against a Su?
No way. I mean, I'd have, yeah, it's just the startup sequence.
It's not the plane, it's the pilot.
Yeah, and I think I've never flown or been in an F-14 simulator, but my understanding was that the Rio in the backseat was very much integral to getting radar locks. And so it's something the pilot couldn't touch. Mm-hmm. And so I wouldn't even be able to find them to get into a dogfight. Yeah.
Do you recommend the movie? Was it something you enjoyed?
The second one, yeah, absolutely. I thought it was, there's definitely a lot of good, like cheesy one-liners, but I thought from the F-18 accuracy standpoint, it was incredibly accurate from the startup sequence to the aircraft itself, to the flying. Like a lot of those scenes were stuff that I'd flown in. A lot of all my peers have flown in out there on the West Coast. And so it is very, very accurate. And they did take the time to ensure they did their due diligence with the movie to promote accuracy. Yeah,
I certainly thought so. I mean, I was a big fan as a kid of the first one. It probably had for decades the most accurate view of what it was like to fly in one of these, and I thought Top Gun Maverick certainly expanded upon that with the idea of the F-18, which brings me to one of Brad's last questions: was how low can you fly an F-18 safely?
The answer is as low as the pilot feels safe. So we are instructed, we can go down in a training environment, we can go down to 200 feet. Now, in certain points of Top Gun, we may have gone a little lower than that. Nothing I can officially say, but in a combat environment, you can go as low as needed, low as you feel comfortable with.
Larry, you had your hand up, and I can't hear you, Larry. Larry Googans. I know we have three Larrys here, but Larry Googans, I'll ask you to unmute. There you go.
My answer to Brad was exactly the same. You can go as low as you want to go.
Yeah.
As long as you live through it.
Yep.
I mean, we've probably both flown down to about 100 feet, but training restrictions kept us up at more like 500 feet. So you train and fly low levels at 500 feet or as close to that as you could get, if you know. But
when you say 100 feet, how high? If I look up in the sky, what's 100 feet high?
I don't know. It's you're not hitting the ground. That's all I know. I've flown down Death Valley at a negative 220 feet or something like that.
Yeah,
whatever it is. So
you're saying like maybe 5 stories up.
If you're flying by yourself, no, I'll leave it alone. If you're flying by yourself, you can fly as low as you want, but there are restrictions. You kind of doing your own thing. So
everything's tracked as well by the FAA if you have a transmitter on. Something we'd say, oh, we might have some malfunction with our transmitter. Turn it off.
That was like automatic.
Yeah.
But we had the old ones, you just turn it off.
Well, we've reached time for the night, Evan. I really want to thank you for all of the really wonderful stories, all the information about Top Gun. It was fascinating stuff. If you're ever willing to take me up in an F-18, I would take you up on that in a heartbeat. But thank you so much for spending the time with us tonight. Just appreciate your time, and it's been an honor.
Yeah, a pleasure chatting with you all and sharing my stories. And Juliet, a pleasure meeting you, and a wonderful story you have.
Pleasure hearing you. It was very interesting. Very, very good.
Thank you, Julia. Thank you, Evan. We put the link in the chat for the survey. If you'd like to answer any questions about tonight's program, it's great. We will be back tomorrow night with Greatest Generation Live. We're going to be talking about the Sullivan brothers from World War II. I believe it's a ship that 5 brothers were serving on, and I think they were all killed in action when the ship was sunk. So we're going to have relatives on of the Sullivan brothers. Todd and Glenn will be on tomorrow night. It was a great pleasure with Evan tonight. Thank you all for being here, and we'll see you on a future episode, a future program with Veterans Breakfast Club.
See you, everyone. Have a great night.
Thank you, Evan. Have a good night, everybody.